Line's good.
Never on.
Whoa.
Hard. Hard, Lisa.
Come on, Brent. Line's good. Got real close. The hair high, right? Try and hit 2/3.
Have they saved it for her? Yes, they have.
Welcome to Game of Stones, everybody. I am Sean Graham, Scott, alongside, as always. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Sean.
How do you do, sir?
Oh, I do. I do.
All right, that's terrific. I'm happy to hear that as we are in the midst of a beautiful spring here in the nation's capital. Scott, we wanted to get away a little bit this week from the bubble and everything going on in the bubble. Certainly a lot of excitement out in Calgary, but we wanted to focus on something that we've talked about on the show over the last year, and that is diversity within curling and what we have talked about in the past, maybe the lack of diversity, because in the past month, Curling Canada has released a new series of initiatives dedicated to diversity and inclusivity at the recreational level, or at least starting at the recreational level within curling in Canada. And we wanted to talk about this because this is the type of thing that we have frankly been looking for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked about it a lot last summer, and the bubble sort of has taken momentum away from it, like for us, but it shouldn't. And so when we saw this new initiative being put out by Curling Canada, it really piqued my interest for sure, yours too, Sean. And we wanted to learn a little bit more about it, where it came from, and sort of where the tools came from to foster more diversity within our curling community.
Yeah, so we reached out to Curling Canada, and we were lucky enough to have Catherine Henderson, the CEO of Curling Canada, come on to talk about this resource guide. The guide has a lot of different sections to it, everything from just highlighting the importance of diversity, things like unconscious bias, efforts that you can put forward, initiatives that you can put forward at the local level to get a more diverse crowd into your curling facility. And there's a lot of great stuff here from Curling Canada. So Catherine was nice enough to come on to discuss these programs with us. So let's get right to our conversation with Catherine Henderson. All right, Catherine Henderson joining us, CEO of Curling Canada. Kathy, how are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for taking the time to join us in the midst of what I know is a very busy time for everybody at Curling Canada, managing the bubble and worrying about Olympic spots and all that kind of stuff. So we appreciate you taking the time, but this is a very important topic that we have talked about on the show a little bit. So just to start, could you talk about the process of putting together this initiative or these initiatives on diversity and inclusivity, and how long this process took for Curling Canada to come out with this?
Well, I think that's one of those questions that's similar to how long is a piece of string. Let's start really at the very beginning. When I arrived at Curling Canada, there's lots of really wonderful, really smart staff here who'd already figured out that, just even from a business perspective, that if we were going to continue to grow the sport and appeal to Canadians, that one of the most important things that we were going to have to do is begin to reach out to people who were just arriving in the country, or maybe had grown up in households that were not familiar with curling. Maybe they had, they come from families without ice or snow in their home countries, that sort of thing. So there's been a lot of work done, I would say, from a very business perspective over a number of years. And it really started with a program we have called Rocks and Rings, which we do in partnership with Chad McMullen at Rock Solid Productions. And it's a program that we invest quite heavily in. And what we do is we make sure that it's a program that goes into schools, so that we are covering 250,000 school children every year and introducing them to the sport on the gym floor. And then we've got a number of programs that try and move them over to the ice. So that, just recognizing that Curling Canada has for many years been trying to reach out to anyone that's interested in curling. The second part that I do want to say is, curling has a very long history of being very inclusive. So It's one of the very few gender balanced sports in Canada in terms of participation, fandom, investment in athletes. So we've got gender balance. We adapt it for anyone that wants to play. So if you're no longer able to get into the hack, people stick curl. If you want to curl, or you want to curl, in multiple different ways. If you want to curl and you're hearing impaired or sight impaired, we have ways of adapting the sport for you. We've got you can curl from a wheelchair. So for many, many years. And then the other part of curling in Canada is that organically and naturally, curling, because it's often played in leagues and people with similar interests, people would group around and they play in teacher leagues, or they play in leagues of people that were Korean Canadian, like that sort of thing, or police leagues. And so we have a long history of creating spaces and places for people that want to play. I'm going to take a pause there and say, because I can get into the much more specific things that we were doing over the last little while.
Okay. Well, it's interesting to me to think about the diverse side of it that you mentioned, because, Scott and we play at the Ottawa Curling Club. They host the Vision Impaired National Championship each year, which is a really wonderful event. I've played against a wheelchair team before, not frequently, but at a spiel, I have played against a wheelchair team. I do think that overall the sport is welcoming, and we've talked on the show before. I think the LGBTQ plus community is a great example of that. There's so many leagues across the country. So for Curling Canada, it's interesting to me to listen to all of the different ways that you want to make the sport accessible, because it kind of leads to the really broad question of how does Curling Canada define diversity and a diverse group of participants and fans?
Sure. I think that's a wonderful question, and thanks for asking it, because it leads into many of the things that we ended up getting very intentional about over the last little while. But I would start off by saying, of all the people that I've met in curling, everyone's welcome. We're always trying to figure out, how do we get little rockers, young people to play? How do you get teenagers to play? And so it's not just the ways that we adapt the sport and that we adapt the implements and we adapt the rules to play. We create different disciplines and different variants and things like that, so that the whole idea is, if you want to play in a mixed team, you want to play on, you want to play doubles, you want to play with young people, we can figure that out with you. And so it's one of the most community-based sports in which the conversation about, who wants to curl is just forefront. And there's always people innovating and always people trying to think about how do we bring in as many people as we can possibly. I think, though, it started probably last March, April, May, as we started to look at the Black Lives Matter movement. We started to look at other people putting their hands up and saying, in everything in my life, I'm feeling that there are things that are holding me back from opportunities that maybe I'd like to pursue, or that they're not visible to me. And so, those are hard things to listen to. And I think particularly if you're a sport that prides yourself in doing all of these things, you have to sort of stop, push the pause button and say, are we in any way stopping anyone from coming into this sport unintentionally? I've never seen anyone intentionally do it, but are there unintentional things that we are doing right now? And that's where we decided to push the pause button and bring in people. And when I say diversity, we had people from our wheelchair curling programs and people from our LGBTQ plus. We had people that played at the community level and in the clubs. We had national team athletes. We had, curlers. We had Black curlers. We had, we just had Asian curlers. We had a whole bunch of people. And the whole idea was a couple of things. First of all, what we really didn't want to do is just start, checking boxes and going, yep, all right, we'll get on that. Is to really not just listen to, it was kind of not what they wanted out of the sport. Is, what could we be doing better? Who were we missing? What are the things that we should be thinking about? Where could we rethink how we approach, new Canadians or people new to the sport. And also, a really important part of that to us was, and what's your experience been? How are you, as somebody that maybe doesn't look like what people imagine the typical curler to look like? What has been your experience, and where are places that are difficult in the whole experience of curling? And I can give you examples of those sorts of things, but uh, really what we wanted was a pretty profound conversation at the beginning, rather than sort of taking statistics and developing marketing plans. It was to say, maybe we need a bit of therapy. Maybe we're delusional and think that we're so welcoming, and maybe we're not. And part of it was to take people that that many of them put their hand up and said, "I'd love to talk to you about that." And they told us some stories, and some of those stories were disturbing to us.
Right. And we've talked to players on the show last summer, certainly, where you get into the case of, some of the stories certainly were just outright, they felt unwelcome at places. But in other cases, it is sort of that unconscious thing. And Scott, what do you think in terms of what Kathy's saying based on our conversations that we had last year with players about that unconscious bias and starting those discussions?
Yeah, I think a lot of good work has been put in this resource guide that Curling Canada's put out to address a lot of the questions that I had about creating a more welcoming and engaging facility for new Canadians, for all sorts of people. One question I had for you, Catherine, was there's talk in this document here about maybe some financial programs that clubs can set up to, put money aside for new leagues and stuff. Is there any Curling Canada support that can, like financial support that can come to that?
There's a couple things that we do. So first of all, thank you for reading that. That was a real labor of love for a couple of people on our staff who listened so hard to these conversations and decided, if the least we could do at this point, and we're doing lots more, but the least we could do is to provide clubs with great resources to help them think through the same problems that we were thinking through, which is really to make curling a sport for everyone that wants to join. And one of the things that you are right, when you talk about barriers to entry, as in many sports, sometimes the barriers are financial. And I'll give you a really interesting example. I don't know if there's a very large study that was done with it was with refugees and kind of people that have arrived on our doors, and often in emergency situations. And there was two points in that study. One is for the children, the best way they can possibly integrate with this sort of healthiest outcomes is to start playing sports with other kids, because there's kind of an international language around playing, soccer, let's say. I'll just use that one. So you integrate kids in, they fit in better, they feel parts of teams, they start to learn some customs and languages and things like that, but they're all playing the same sport, which everyone plays around the world. Well, the second point of the study was, when you talk to the parents and you say to them, it's a really good idea to get your children involved, they're saying, like, I'm so, I'm making these words up, but, my priorities at this thing is getting a roof over my head and getting some food on the table. And I don't really have time to be thinking about, curling clubs and transportation and leagues and, and reading safety manuals and all those sorts of things in a language that may not be familiar with me. So there's these huge barriers that actually are keeping kids new to Canada away from sport that really have nothing to do with the joy of sport, or they feel welcome, they want to be on the field, but there's just other priorities in their lives. So one of the things that we had been talking about is, first of all, this Rocks and Rings program is just get into the school and let's not have to rely on parents. Like, let's bring this, kind of bring the mountain to Muhammad, if you will. And then the second part is, and if there are financial barriers, let's make sure that there's a couple things. One is, we do have some programming. It tends to be for youth. And we just talk to clubs individually. But the other thing we promote is there's quite a bit of programming out in the communities, and the people that work on these. We have a kind of a charitable arm, and we do quite a bit of raising. It's called For the Love of Curling, and it's meant for junior programming. And the woman that runs it, Brody Bazinet, is very savvy on these things. So anyone can contact her, and she can generally help them figure out how to access sport, and in particular how to access curling for young people.
Well, it's interesting to think of that too in terms of the barriers to entry that you're talking about, getting young people into the facility. And how much do you think, because this has been a discussion that has gone on for a while within the curling community, the business model of curling in Canada is you sign up in the fall
Yeah,
for 20 weeks or 24 weeks, whatever it is, until the spring. You
yeah,
play usually with the same folks the whole time. So you have to have a team and be on a
yeah,
team to sign up. Some clubs will put you with somebody if you sign up as a single, but generally speaking, you're signing up for the whole winter at once and
yeah.
with the same team the whole time. So how much of the just business model of this creates a barrier, and what do you think facilities can do? Because I really do think facilities across the country are going to have to start to get creative, and you're starting to see it a little bit in some places. So, what sort of ideas do you think Curling Canada has put forth just in that barrier of that major time commitment that you have to make to play usually?
Yeah, well, we have I call him the curling savant. It's Danny Lamoureux, who works on our staff, and he really understands this whole conundrum very well. And we offer really an array of solutions, but I think the first solution you need a club with an open mind that says, I'm thinking forward. And sometimes it's hard to do when you've got full leagues, morning, noon, and night, and you've got a waiting list. You're not really thinking about whether there's barriers to entry and that sort of thing. But for many clubs, what they're really starting to see is that there's a real demographic shift around them, and they're starting to wonder, how do we bring people in, and how do we create that sort of traction with our club? And people are different now than they were 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're a bit more itinerant. People move around a bit more. They hate year-long contracts. Everybody's doesn't want to lock into their telco provider, and they just want they want service when they want it. And so we've seen some pretty innovative clubs that have started to allow drop-ins and try curling. One of the things that we have developed at Curling Canada, and it's been hugely successful, and we can target it in almost any way, is we've developed kind of a social media campaign that's hyper local. And we will work with individual clubs and say, if they say, I've got an adult league on Tuesdays, then we say to them, well, tell us a bit more about your demographic and who in your demographic would that appeal to? And we can help them do reach outs. And we're finding that we are getting kind of a let's try curling. We're getting people on the ice 2, 3, 4, 5 times greater than what the club can normally achieve through their regular type of advertising. And then we put together a program. It's an adult learn to curl, but we also have a children's version of it called Curling 101 that we see very high conversion rates. If you get people in the club, you get them to have fun, show them what it's all about, and then you put them into one of these programs, what you see is very high conversion rates to people saying, I'd really like to join a league. And what you have to do with the club then is you have to have a club that's ready and willing to be flexible to say, I'm going to accept a whole group of people right now into my club that may not want to sign up for a 24-week season, or they may not know other people in the club. So the club's got to do a lot of heavy lifting, I think. And a big part of this, when you were talking about the diversity resources, I would say some of this was very much born of the fact that I think curlers have told themselves for years, and I believe it to be true, if you go into any club, you are more than welcome. And I'd put my hand over my heart and say that's pretty well true of any curling club I've ever walked into. The issue is it's getting through the door. I probably shouldn't even say curling clubs. We like to call them curling centers. The word club sort of implies, some people are in, some people are out. You walk in, it's hard to say, oh, this is a private club. This is something that members, maybe I need to know somebody. You just don't. People just don't wander into curling clubs very often. There's a process that you have to go through to sort of step through the door. And once you're in there, the people are amazing and they're wonderful and they welcome you. And I've belonged to a couple of curling clubs in my life, and I found that very much. But it's hard to get to the door, I think, for some people. And that's where we need to be. All the clubs and the member associations and Curling Canada need to be out in the community more, showing people how to, how to street curl and how to curl on the gym floor and how much fun all these things are, and create fans through our broadcasts, and then work with the clubs to say, there's a ton of people out there that want the same experience as the people that are on the inside. Let's figure out how to give that to them.
That's a really good point, because one of the barriers is that you need to be in that facility. And I'm with you. I've tried to stop using the word clubs on the show too. Curling facilities, curling centers, whatever it is. Because it does create a more inclusive space. But yeah, when you're going up against potentially soccer or basketball, like a basketball, you put up a hoop, you play. You got a ball and a grass, you can play. You need to get people in the facility in some way and something to draw them there. Because Scott, we know that whenever people show up, they really tend to have a good time.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the other things about curling clubs that can be daunting to somebody is when you go in, a lot of them are sort of adorned with a Scottish theme or something that could be really foreign to a new Canadian who's coming in and looking to find inclusion, right? So just even the physical appearance of the facility can create a barrier to entry. So a lot of great options that we've talked about today, and a lot more to be found in the literature here too.
Yeah. So just one other thing I want to talk about quickly is the representation that we see on TV. I like to talk about the Vic essay and whether or not do we meet the Vic essay standard. And sometimes I think the Vic essay is a little over the top, and I don't know if we necessarily meet that standard. So how do we filter this through? And in all the discussions that were had at Curling Canada, how much did representation at the highest level, at the Brier, at the Scotties, come up? And we see it in the commercials. I think the commercials that Curling Canada has produced are great. I love the one this year of the little girl who's watching Carrie Anderson win with the toilet paper. Like, those type of commercials are really great. But how much of the discussions were related to representation at that highest level? And how long do you think it'll take until what we see at the Brier and the Scotties really fully represents the communities that we live in across the country?
Sure. That's a wonderful question. That's kind of the question. Well, first of all, I would say if you take a look at us at the highest level, I would say visually you may not see a population of national team athletes that look like, the demographics that, that represent the face of Canada, I guess, if you will. We do have a number of diverse athletes, though. I mean, we have athletes from all different communities that participate in our national teams, from our Indigenous communities and from our LGBTQ 2+ communities and from our Asian communities. That being said, I will tell you, when I get the opportunity at times to see very junior things. I see the U18s and the U21s, and I would say when I go to those, I have a tremendous amount of hope that over the next 5 to 8 years, as we're pulling those next generation athletes, those athletes that we think could make the podium, in the next 5 to 8 years, that Team Canada, our national team program, will really start to reflect who we are really as a nation. But it's not going to happen right now. I would challenge anyone to go and look at our Little Rock programs and things, around the country, and who's playing on the gym floor, and you'd say, I'm definitely seeing what Canada looks like at that very junior level. In terms of, the representation piece, I think it's really critically important. And every one of us has something, when we aspire to something, we look for people like us. And, this isn't to talk about me, but when I was a younger executive and I wanted to work in sports, I was looking for female executives that worked in sports. I wanted to say, what's your experience be? And I really wanted to be able to see that. And so some of the things that I think we are doing a lot better at is very consciously saying, rather than just sort of picking standard stock curling photos that express joy and the love of sport and everything. Let's make sure that those pictures accurately reflect who Canadians are and who we would like to see reflected in our sport. And so we've done a lot of things like that. I want to give a shout out to Kruger. Those are the Kruger Paper Company. They're the ones that actually did that wonderful commercial, and it was done for the Scotties. And it's a little girl sort of dreaming about winning a Scotties one day. And I really applaud them because they want to see that too, and they've been wonderful partners over the last number of years. But I would say to a partner, every one of them wants to see the sport thrive. And I would the things that we're talking about right now. On one hand, I'd say let's do them, everybody, because they're absolutely and utterly the right thing to do. And then I have a side of me that says, and I'm a business person, and let's do all those things because as a business choice, it's integral that if you want to grow the sport, you better be appealing, because I'll tell you, the soccers and the baseballs and the snowboarding and all the other sports, they're competing with us. They want those same kids too. So we better be a pretty appealing sport, and kids better be able to look at us and say, I see myself playing that sport. There's nothing intimidating about it. And clubs need to be able to say, this is a whole younger group of people that are coming in and they have different expectations, and I need to be able to adapt my business model to people that are going to be paying the bills at this place over the next 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important for us to say, right, that this is not just something that came up just because of the state of the world. It came up because it needed to come up.
Yeah.
And there's great resources for all the clubs that are looking for things to do. And yeah, we should look at this as a long-term strategy rather than a short-term Band-Aid solution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Although, and thank you for that. I mean, I think there are things that we can do in the short term that make people feel more included. And I think that's when you're improving things on the margins. But when you really want to make full scale change, what you're talking about, Sean and Scott, are the things that, is really taking the long look at this and say, who are we as a sport? Who do we want to be? How do we get there? And then you work hand in hand. We've got wonderful member associations and great curling facilities, and everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants as many people as possible to enjoy the sport, and we're going to help them so that we can all continue to play and love it and have a lot of fun.
Catherine, is there any last thing that you want to say about this? I think we've done a pretty good job, but if you can sum it up in a couple words.
I think the things that we've done over the last little while, I would call them first steps. We have grandiose ambitions, and I'm fully confident that we've got the people and the resources and the will to get there. I think the things that you and I are talking about right now, and some of those resources, they're absolutely essential first steps. But I would say, having conversation and being really open and really listening to what people are telling you that they want from the sport is much more important than me trying to sell you on what I think is great about the sport from my perspective, because it may not be great to you from your perspective. So I think as a curling community, what we need to do is to take a look at those people that we wish to join us in all the fun and all the camaraderie and all the wonderful experiences they have, and spend that time listening to say, what do you want out of this, and how can we help you get there?
The last thing for me, and Kathy, because I do know you have to go, it just had to do with gender parity in the sport, and the Scotties and the Briar purses now being the same. Do you think that we are at a point at the elite level where we've seen gender parity, and moving forward that the men and the women are on the same footing?
I would say absolutely, and I've said this before. Again, on one hand, equal work, equal pay. So we needed to get there. On the other hand, though, when we sat down and looked at this as a business strategy, when I sat down with the team and everyone agreed with this, is let's make sure that the Scotties Tournament of Hearts right now is not only the largest female sporting event in Canada, it is also one of the largest sporting events in Canada. And that's really where the investment was. And I look at, we have a number of Season of Champion events, and I look at it as a business person, as portfolio management as well. So I say, let's do the right thing first and foremost, but secondly, who doesn't want two really great products that the public loves, and they want to buy tickets and they want to watch it on television, and sponsors love it. Who doesn't want two? If you can have two, why would you settle with one? So, to me, goosing the women's game and putting those investments behind it just to grow it to the point where it's an equal in size event in pretty well most ways. Was a great business choice as well as being the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I know it's my favorite event of the year for sure.
Yeah.
Like it's my number one. I love the Scotties, definitely.
Yeah.
So Kathy, where can people go to find more information about the diversity and inclusivity initiatives, and just if they want to bring these into their own curling facilities, into their own communities, where can people go to get more information?
Well, please go on to curling.ca, and all the information that you want is there. Doesn't matter whether you're affiliated with us or not. We want every single facility in Canada to take these things and to pass them along and to use them. We really want more people coming into the sport, and we want to so we're providing materials and helping people help themselves, but they're available to anyone. So look on curling.ca and look under our diversity and inclusion initiatives, and all the materials, all the resources, all the kits, all the posters, all the social media things. It's all there for you, and please take them and use them.
All right. So we encourage everybody to check that out. Catherine Henderson, CEO of Curling Canada, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott and Sean. Much appreciated.
So there you have it, our discussion with Catherine Henderson, CEO of Curling Canada. Of course, we thank her for her time. Scott, I thought that was great. And you've read the diversity inclusivity initiatives. I've gone through them as well. I'm very impressed with the documentation here. And I'm really impressed that these are not just words and like checking boxes, like Catherine said. There are very specific, targeted things that we can implement at the local level. Even if you're just a once a week player, there are things in here that you can do that hopefully over time will start to improve the diversity of the sport, make it a welcoming place, and allow for the sport to truly reflect the Canadian population.
Yeah, Sean, like you said, these are concrete actions that you can take. They're not just words. So going through the guide, like you say, there's some words about unconscious bias, but then also a lesson to click through and go to do a little more work on how you might be unconsciously biased. I think we all have some unconscious bias, and that's why it's unconscious. That there's like a lot of work that was put into this, some really good concrete actions. It answers pretty much all my questions, right? I asked Catherine about financial aid for clubs looking for it. There is some options available. I'm really, really impressed. Now, what's gonna be needed to do is to have members out there, who's most of the people listening, to put pressure on their boards to take advantage of these tools, right? And really make sure that they're put to use, that they don't just become words, that they stay as something that's really concrete, usable. And, we'll see in 5-10 years how much they were able to succeed or not. And that'll be incumbent on the clubs and the boards themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as Kathy talked about a little bit, this is business too, right? I mean, the country is diverse, and to run a successful business, I think the business side of it would benefit from it. And as I said, as we were talking to her, from the elite level standpoint, you want to keep winning gold medals, or you want to keep winning world championship, you have to draw from as large a talent pool as possible. So these initiatives are really wonderful for every level, from the rec level all the way up to the elite level. So do check those out. As Kathy said, head on over to curling.ca. You can find all the material over there. So again, we thank you for your time and encourage everybody to check that out. Even if you're not in Canada, there are things that you can do. These are not just Canadian specific things. Some of the funding might be, but the actual programming, the ideas in there, these are pretty universal to the sport everywhere. So even though it is, yes, a Curling Canada program, certainly material out there for non-Canadians as well.
Yeah, and I would say not even specific to curling, right? If you are any kind of community leader, I think you could benefit from taking a read through that.
Absolutely. So that will do it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you have not yet, please do subscribe to the show wherever it is you get your podcast. Do the likes, the ratings, comments. Helps beat the algorithm. Helps other people find the show. Keeps us growing. You can also follow along on social media at Game of Stones Pod on Twitter and Instagram, or at Game of Stones Podcast on Facebook, where on Friday, April the 9th, we will be doing a Men's World Championship pod stack after the last round robin game. Scott, we will know who's going to the Olympics.
Wow.
On the
Looking forward to that.
And we might know like 3 of the actual teams. 3, maybe 4 of the teams.
Yeah, maybe 4.
Yeah, we'll see. So so that should be a lot of fun. So join us over there. If you want to let us know what you want to hear on the show, Game of Stones Podcast at gmail.com, and head on over to gameofstonespod.com. All of our past episodes are there, plus the merch, which will have proceeds going to the Sandra Schmerler Foundation for the new merch, t-shirt proceeds going to Food Banks Canada. Scott, you won in this week and having all the proceeds donated.
Sorry, Sean, you cut out there a bit, and I'm not making a joke. You really did. But yes, the funds for this week will be downloaded by the time, or downloaded will be submitted once people are listening to this podcast.
Awesome. So that, you know what that means? We need to donate more stuff. So head on over to gameofstonespod.com, merch for the donations. But as we always say, if you just want to give a donation to someone without buying something, then we're not going to complain. We're not going to argue with you on that. So there you go. That'll do it for us. Scott, thank you for joining as always.
Thanks, Sean. Fun.
What do you got on tap now?
Well, like you say, it's a beautiful day. I might just go sit outside.
All right.
Look at the world going by.
Okay. Well, enjoy yourself. I think I might head out as well as we get set for the rest of the Men's World Championship. We'll be back with you on Sunday night to talk about all of the fun and frivolity. We'll have a world champion on Sunday night. We will be here to talk about everything that happened over the course of the week. So join us then. But until then, keep those brooms on the ice. Don't dump that intern.
Make the final.